Everybody, this is Rachel, the StudentWitch, and welcome back to another episode of Tarot Favorites, specifically Major Favorites, because I'm still working through the Major Arcana. And basically the idea of the series is just to kind of give myself a platform to just ramble about tarot. So I'll have up here in the cards linked a link to the first episode about the Fool, where I talked about my favorite representation of the Fool in amongst the decks that I own. So my deck collection is kind of limited to, I don't really consider myself a collector, although maybe in the future as I get some more stable income I can invest more and more into the decks that kind of catch my eye. But I do have, for me, a good amount of tarot and oracle decks, and so among those decks I'm using this series as an opportunity to talk about my favorite representations of each of the cards, starting with the Major Arcana, and then eventually I'll get to the Court cards, and then to the Minor Arcana cards. So I've got a long way to go in building up this series. So I'm trying to do at least one card per month, and so this month it is the Magician, the first numbered card in the Major Arcana. So as per usual, or at least as per what I'm hoping to establish as usual, I kind of share and read a little bit from my go-to reference book for tarot, which so far is the Gnostic Tarot Mandalas for Spiritual Transformation by Lee Irwin. I really love this book. It has really in-depth descriptions of the cards, and just approaching it from a Gnostic perspective, it tickles my pickle. So I usually kind of read a little bit from Lee Irwin's description of the card, just a few sentences, just to get a base or establish the base understanding of what most people think of when they see the Magician, for example. And I have the Rider-Waite-Smith here as a reference, so we all can be on the same page when talking about the Magician, or whichever card happens to be that card for that particular episode. And then I share my favorites. And this week, or this time around, we actually have two representations of the Magician, which are my favorite for different reasons. So as I talk about each one of these two representations, I'll refer to their guidebooks. And so many of you will recognize this, but it is from the Osho Zen Tarot, so I'll read a sentence or two from the guidebook for this deck, the Osho Zen, just to see what the creator has to say about this particular representation of the Magician, and then we'll have a look at what Kat Black has to say about the representation of the Magician in the Golden Tarot in her guidebook. So yeah, so we have the Osho Zen and the Golden Tarot. However, this week, I keep saying week as if I do this weekly. I don't, I do this monthly. This time around, I'm going to be sharing a little bit from this book, which I'm reading as part of my Witchy Studies series, and next weekend will be the first video in that series because the first study unit is about chaos and chaos magic. But this book is blowing my mind. My partner actually recommended this book to me because years ago he found a copy of it at the university library, the science library to be specific, and he read it, and it was just transformative for him. So I'm reading it now, but I'm going to be referring back to the first chapter, which talks about truth and creativity, because basically these two cards, these two representations of the magician speak so loudly to me about truth and creativity, according to the definitions of truth and creativity that these two authors talk about in their first chapter of the 7 Life Lessons of Chaos. So before we dive into chaos, truth, and creativity, let's just get a baseline. So the magician, let me just read a little bit of what Lee Irwin in the Gnostic Tarot has to say about the magician, just a little bit. So on page 220, he states, "The power of the magician lies not simply in control, not simply in the manipulation of an arcane lore. Magical power, born out of a lifetime of searching and constantly purified intent, is an accomplishment of greatest ability. This ability arises as knowledge, not as chimera of the imagination, but as an actual insight and capacity to attune to the overflowing abundance of the sacred currents of transformation and becoming, not as mere manipulator of symbols or as a synergistic union of diverse elements, numbers, or qualities, but as a profound and truly magical awakening, one leading out of the narrow confines of denial and self-delusion and into the vast, holy, and profound depths of an infinite and utterly vital cosmos." So, of course, being a Gnostic approach to the tarot, we have the themes of knowledge and even truth, too. Knowledge being something more than just skill, because I think it's pretty common to see the magician as a sign or a call for mastery, self-mastery, but also mastery of your tools, mastery of your own life, and the ability to use these different tools to exercise some sort of control over the outcomes of your projects and goals in your life. But knowledge in the Gnostic sense is something more than just mastery or skill, or the manipulation of tools, as Irwin was talking about in his description of the magician. It's truth, an approach to truth that is very much in line with the 7 Life Lessons of Chaos idea of truth. And truth being something kind of expressed in union, the union of the self with the indivisible, the individual with the indivisible, which we're going to get to here in a second. So in most representations of the magician, especially ones that are inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith, we usually have a table with the symbols of the 4 suits before the magician. Usually there's an infinity symbol, and there's this idea of connecting as above with below, or as above as below, through mastery. And it's not just mastery of tools, it's self-mastery, right? I think those are kind of pretty common ideas of the magician. Now, getting to the 7 Life Lessons of Chaos. Each chapter in this book is a lesson from chaos theory that the authors put into accessible language. They explain how chaos theory works and how it affects things from climate and climate science to different ecological phenomena to our own bodies and the way we think and society and human behavior. It's just fascinating. And it's been a game changer for me in my own approach to life and my own spirituality even. And so the first chapter is called Being Creative. And they're just talking about how using the metaphor of chaos and looking for inspiration in chaos theory teaches us that creativity is not a skill or a superpower or a talent that belongs to the few. Creativity is not just something that artists or creative writers have, especially if we start to break down the idea of like who gets to claim that they are an artist, who gets to claim being an artist or a writer. Traditionally, at least in Western thought, an artist is, we think of the fine arts, or we think of high literature. We don't think about the grandmother who lovingly makes quilts for her children and grandchildren, right? But how come we can say that a painting by Monet, for example, is creative and innovative for its time, but the grandmother's act of making the quilt, or what has been labeled as decoration by colonial European forces in other cultures, is actually why can't we say that carpet making or making household tools or even decorations, why can't we say that that is an art? I just got done watching this amazing, it's one of the best documentary series I've watched in a long time. It's called Civilizations with an S. It's by PBS. I'll include the link to it below in the description box. You can watch it on Netflix right now. And it's basically a reprisal, or it's responding to an old documentary series that PBS made back in, I think, the 60s or the 70s called Civilization, but singular. And it's the new version that I think came out very recently. It goes through art history, but in a global sense. It's not just upholding Eurocentric definitions of art and creativity. It looks towards other cultures, and it talks openly about colonialism and racism and how European definitions of art and what counted as art were implicated and colluded in colonial projects, right? So how come products that were made by China or by people in Africa, when Europeans came in, they didn't see those products as art, they just said that they were household decoration, right? Because the only thing that counted as art were the big Renaissance masters and painters, right? So there are 9 episodes to this series, and I cannot recommend it enough. It was so thorough, and it took diversity seriously. It confronted colonialism, and it talks about art like for the past 50,000 years. Right, from ancient human history and prehistory all the way into the 20th and the 21st century, because they interview contemporary artists in each of the episodes. It's really, really well done. Really well done. So anyway, I'll have a link to that below. But yeah, so on the same lines, these authors are talking about creativity and how we all can claim creativity. Because, and let me read their kind of definition of creativity and truth. Specifically, they're talking about a metaphor, the symbol of the vortex. A vortex is a distinct and individual entity, and yet it is indivisible from the river that created it. So thinking about the vortex within a raging river or a creek and the way the water moves in the chaotic way. And later they say, the vortex suggests the paradox that the individual is also the universal. Our creative moments, whether it is looking freshly at a tree or coming to a new understanding about our lives, are moments when we are in touch with our own authentic truth, when we experience our unique presence in the world. But paradoxically, the experience of a unique presence is often coupled with the sensation of ourselves as indivisible from the whole. And then later they continue. It's what happens in our small and large moments of empathy and transformation. The moments when we contact our authentically individual and therefore universal experience of truth. So the creative moment here, it's not just the great Renaissance masters putting a paintbrush to a fresco in a cathedral in Italy somewhere. It's when we are wholly ourselves in the moment, in the creative moment, and by being wholly within ourselves in that moment of creation, we are simultaneously touching on what makes us unique and individual, and also connecting with what's greater than ourselves, right? And I love how they mention that this moment can be looking at a tree you might have passed on the sidewalk 1,000 times, but all of a sudden, for whatever reason, whatever chaotic reasons that led you to that moment, you look at that tree as if you've never seen a tree before, and you appreciate its uniqueness, right? That can be a creative moment. The moment when you're sitting in front of your altar and you're meditating, and all of a sudden you have that light bulb go off, or you have that download from the universe and you burst into tears because you finally understand something on such a deep level, even though you might have approached this thing 1,000 times before in 1,000 different ways for whatever chaotic reasons. That universe download just strikes you, and you're forever changed by that moment, and you burst into tears. I've had many moments like that in front of my altar. That is creativity, right? That is being in the present moment, in the act of creation, connecting with yourself as an individual, but also connecting with the universal whole, something more than just yourself, something transpersonal, right? And that is what these two representations of the magician say to me. Here in the Osho Zen, instead of the magician, we have it labeled existence, and we have the individual here connecting with the greater whole. And then here in the Golden Tarot, we have the magician. And what's really fascinating about the Golden Tarot, and the Golden Tarot by Kat Black is one of my favorite decks ever. Oh my lord, I love it. Because the Golden Tarot is, it's collage work. So all of the images that you see in all of the cards are collages put together by the artist, and they come from late medieval and early Renaissance European artworks. A lot of them come from frescoes and works that are actually in cathedrals throughout Europe. And so what's really cool is in the back of the guidebook, she provides the list for every single one of the cards and tells you where each figure in the card came from. So here we have sources for the magician, and the man and animals in the magician card, this central figure here, the magician himself, comes from a paint on wood in Kunsthal, Hamburg, from around the year 1383. So we're talking about the late medieval period, by Master Bertram, who was a German painter, and it's called Creation of the Animals, which was a panel from an altarpiece. I don't know if you can see that. So this figure here represents the Abrahamic God in the moment of creating the animals at the beginning of creation. So here we have creativity. We have the true self and creation together in these two representations of the magician. That chaotic, creative moment where the true self becomes something more than just the self by going both inward and outward. It's an inward and outward moment of creation. Just fascinating stuff. I just love how these two cards, even though the styles are drastically different, on the surface, I mean, even the names of these cards are different, but they both speak to that universal creativity that we can all tap into. That power that we all have to be innovative, to approach different aspects and events in our lives in different ways, to learn from ourselves. It's just, I love it so much. I love it so much. Yeah. I mean, I can go on and on all day about chaos and creativity and the individual and the indivisible, but in a nutshell, that's what these two cards speak to me about. And that's why I love them so very much. All right, I think instead of rambling more, I'm going to try to keep this one around 20 minutes. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Comment below if anything that I said jived with you. And just share, what are your favorite representations of the magician? Is the magician one of your favorite cards in the Major Arcana? My favorite card of the Major Arcana, or the card that I usually connect with the most, is actually the next one coming up, which is the High Priestess. And I'm super excited to talk about that because that involves talking about my matron goddess. So yeah, but what are your favorite representations of the magician? The magician is such a powerful and important card. I mean, I could say that about all the cards in the tarot, but being the first numbered card and coming directly after the Fool and speaking to individuality, but not at the expense of the universal, it's just so powerful. Such a powerful card. So yeah, comment below, share your thoughts, and until next time, many blessings.